So we're meeting as is right in such times. James Baldwin's prophetic words, "The fire next time," has been preceded by unprecedented hurricanes and floods. What times are we in? Stan Rushworth. I received a message on Facebook, of all places, about 3 years ago from a man I didn't know. He said he'd been using a quotation of mine each year in a class at Cabrillo College and wanted to thank me for it by sending me his recent book. I was alarmed that I had to add another book to my reading. But I sent him my address. A few days later, I opened Going to Water, a journal of beginning rain. Within a few pages, I gasped. I knew by the first chapters that I was reading one of the great books of our time. Reading the book to its finish confirmed this recognition. Going to Water is a great American novel, a great Native American and great indigenous novel. In his own words, he is devoted to the ideas, feelings, words that spring out of indigenous experience, Native American experience, mixed blood experience, non-indigenous experience, and the stories that rise up through all our histories together. He is currently working on the collection American Diaspora, stories of where post-traumatic stress disorder and post-colonial stress disorder dovetail, where indigenous lives and colonial lives meet in indigenous colonial descendants in the breeds spread far and wide across the world. It is a survival manual through story and a mirror of where we all are today. But for tonight, as we await American Diaspora, I want to emphasize this. Going to Water, from which he is going to read, is a great novel. By which I mean the rare literary occasion where indigenous wisdom, contemporary intelligence, and vision, originality, profundity, story, character, range, heart, and determined truth-telling combine in one narrative and shake us to our roots, changing us accordingly. In this book, and in his earlier book of healing, Story and Prayer, Sam Wood's American Healing, Stan looks without flinching at our tragic current reality. His vision is critical to these times. On a lighter and more personal note, A Reign of Nightbirds would not be the book it is without the generous eyes of both Carolyn and Stan, who read it again and again and again. This is a first, but I doubt the last meeting of Carolyn and Stan, and so an important gathering of us all. Thank you all for being with us to bear witness to this time that calls us to do it together.
I'm a little shaky, don't mind that. It's the agent inside of me, that being Agent Orange. Thank you for your service. It keeps happening and happening, you know, it keeps coming back. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Right? You gotta have a sense of humor. So, I'm gonna read 2 chapters and a few words. This book comes out of, I say what I knew as an infant and a child, and also what I was taught by my grandfather, because my mother gave me to him when I was 5, and she said, our way of life is in danger of dying, so you raise this kid so it doesn't die. Well, you know, that's a heck of a thing to put on a kid, right? So what it is, I hesitate to call it an idea because it's not an idea. And I hesitate to call it a vision because it's not that either. It's a knowing, I suppose, that all of human existence includes, is the right word, all of space and all of time. Okay? So, Carolyn, you're talking about the dream. So in that sense, all of what we're living is the human dream. And everything that happens in that dream, in any place, at any time, affects every other moment in time and space. And the separations that we're acculturated into are very arbitrary. And they have a tendency to keep us from being accountable for our actions. And I think we can see where we are today in terms of climate change and everything else. It's a very definite result of this lack of accountability. So, this book is written from, it's a journal, the Journal of Beginning Rain. Beginning Rain is the woman's name who is writing the journal. Agana is the Tsalagi word for beginning rain. I like the sound of it. Agana, right? Agana is fully falling rain. Agana, it's just the beginning, right? And she's confronted by a 6-year-old girl in the town next to her who's never spoken, who periodically goes into states of what we now call depression or catatonia, where she comes very near death. None of the healers can figure out why this is happening. So they call Agana, because Little Rain, the little girl, has such a similar name. And they think maybe there's a connection. So Agana goes in to the girl's dream. And in her dream, she sees manifest destiny. She sees, and this is 1,000 years before contact. This is 1,000 years. She comes from 1,000 years before Columbus, okay? And in this little girl's dream, she sees George Armstrong Custer. She sees, you all know who that is, right? Right? The general. She sees Dachau. She sees the Mayan kings, the impulse to empire, okay, that takes over in so many places in the world. She sees the massacre at Sand Creek in the 1860s. Right? She sees a lot of things. She sees Nagasaki, okay, in this little girl's dream 1,000 years before contact. And she decides, she sees that what this is doing in the Cherokee culture, this is called crossing the children's fire. And it's the greatest, quote, sin. That you do things, you create a world that destroys children's belief in life. You know? And so these perpetrators are constricting the human imagination and making us believe the ultimate lie, which is that human nature is fallen, that human nature is bad. We believe that, we fall to authoritative structures that then tell us how to be because we no longer take responsibility for our own lives. Okay? So she decides, sits with her grandmother and says, we've got to at least, we cannot change history, but we've got to at least meet with these perpetrators at the moment of their death and give them the opportunity to see what they've done, because that then opens a door in the human imagination. So the first chapter I'm going to read is Agana's meeting with George Armstrong Custer at Little Bighorn. And the reason I'm reading this is because this is the chapter that my big sister here read. She's my big sister. She's my older sister, DEENA, okay? And I didn't know that till 3 years ago, even though I've been using her poem for 30 years at Cabrillo, right? But she read this chapter and it grabbed her, so I'm going to read this in honor of her. My name is Agana, beginning rain. And no one knows when I was born. That's because I'm like the cloud people, the Zapotec, who evolved from nowhere. We have always existed, and when conditions were right, we came into being. The truth is, I've been around a long time, and I'm no one to mess with. I am a tall, strong, smart woman, and on good days, fearless enough to get the job done. I will match wits with anyone, and I can back it up. I can back up the tongue they say is smart with fists, feet, knives, or guns. I can slice someone apart with a gaze or bring a person down onto the soft earth in peace and gentleness, whatever needs to happen. Someone called me beautiful the other day, and it surprised me because I don't often think of human things that way, although stars are undoubtedly beautiful, and the sunrise in each precious breath. But when I bent to wash my hair later that day, I gazed into the still pond anyway, and my open black hair hung its tips into the cool water as I kneeled over the surface, and the eyes that sparkled back up at me had a brief moment of looking like stars. So I thought about what that woman said and took its meaning into consideration. Beauty is a powerful thing in this world, after all. It can hide people, keep others from seeing what's beneath, intentions, darkness lying in there ready to pounce. It seduces too, promising thing, drawing another person or being into a sphere of influence, like the flash of a lure to a hungry trout. Like Custer, they say he was beautiful too, but me, I only remember the crimson of his blood and the blood of those he touched, like a scythe he was across our lands. Because of that memory, I had to go there, you see, just before he died. I stepped between all those steel-tipped arrows and dying creatures to where he lay died. Close-cropped golden hair matted with sweat and horse blood and human blood and fear. Everything was getting quiet like it does after a battle. The surreal quiet and drone of death stepping away in the mind, from the mind. The warriors' hands were shaking, quivering as the fighting power fell from them. All of it over now. Another reality slipping into place. The kind of knowing that each warrior will learn to live with, learn to carry, whether it's in his nightmares, dreams of glory, or knowledge of being part of a history that will last forever. It's in the smell of urine and blood, in his fear, in his having won the battle, in the strength he lets slide off as another way of living enters him and changes him forever. The warriors saw me approach Custer, and they backed away. My flint knife was not for killing, and they could see its medicine, centuries old. One man dropped to his knees, placed his palm on the earth and sang softly, watching, helping us all. A pale blue mist rose from the ground, and silence encompassed the general and me. He was afraid when he saw the knife, fear peeling his eyes back so the whites shone brightly up at me. "You're safe," I said. "Soon to be dead, but safe, and you will not die at my hand." He took a breath. The fear did not leave his eyes, but it wasn't of me anymore. It was of himself, of what he would see of his life in the next moments, meeting his own heaven and hell, because this was the world he knew and made for himself and everyone else. Heaven and hell, that simple scourge brought into our land. I saw his journey flit across his eyes. Then I let 4 small drops of dark liquid from my pouch fall into his mouth and slung it back across my chest. "I want you to live a little longer so you have time to think. You must look at all the killing you have done, at the way you have seen us, at the cowardice you displayed in killing so many innocents." He stared at me, wanting to be hard, but he could not. "Now your arrogance has finally killed you and your men, and your terrorizing my people is finished, and you have to listen." He tried to speak, but his voice was cut short by the approach of 3 Cheyenne and Hunkpapa fighters. I looked at them quickly, and they stopped a respectful distance away. They had never seen me before, but they knew me, knew who I was. Our people are like that. They could see what I was doing, so they watched, standing very still. The warrior with his palm on the ground continued singing very softly into the earth. "Do you see it now?" I asked. But Custer stared straight ahead, refusing in his stubbornness, though he was no longer afraid of the men. I reached down and sliced a small tuft of his hair with the flint knife. Gold, I thought. That's what it's all about. Custer leading the geologist into Dakota territory despite government promises. As usual, the promise falling prey to the need of those who break it. Predation justified by need. I held the hair in front of Custer's eyes. "Here's your gold," I said. Not to be cruel, but to be real with him. No pity, no mercy. I led his eyes to the ground, and he followed my hand forward and downward until my fingers touched the earth, and I put the hair in the ground. I scooped a small hole in the soil and covered it, and Custer's eyes stayed on the tiny, dark mound. "Maybe Earth will take you back to truth now," I said, very softly, for I wanted him to listen to his own voices. We all listened, the warriors and me and Custer, and the sky began to change around us all. Dreadful dark, then light, light, then dreadful dark, moving above the softly circling blue mist. "It is up to you now. This is your chance. So don't be as stupid in your dying as you have been in your life. Take your chance." Custer stared and breathed, and his eye turned to the darkening purple sky, then back to the damp earth, while the herbs opened his heart to his mind, and he breathed on. The warriors watched, asking themselves if this man deserved the chance he was getting to see himself, maybe to make amends as he died. But they knew enough of life and death to know that this was not their decision. Each of them had fallen to the cruelty that had too long spread across their vast holy prairies, a plague, and each had to make their own amends in whatever way they could. Few were spared the corruption within this great change come upon them. For them to deny this fighter, this man, this scourge, this hero of the enemy, his own moment in the growing darkness would be to deny themselves the same possibility. Then Custer looked directly at me where I remained kneeling above him, and his eyes finally fell open. There were no tears, but there was a moment of their glazing over when I knew he was seeing his wife's eyes and mine. And I let this happen with a rueful smile, tender and hard at once, for I would never be fooled by such things. And though he was cruel and deranged, it may be that he loved too. I have been seen as many things, beautiful and kind and cruel and ugly, and as long as that vision serves earth, I will let it be. I know any vision changes when I don't hold to it, and change it did quickly, and then I became all those Indian women who fell under his sword, and his eyes stayed on mine, straight into me, unflinching, widening, his soul breaking open, and I stared back into him. It did not take long, for the medicine is quick in its purpose, and he was a child beneath me, lying against the contorted limbs of his dead comrades. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, struggling for an answer, trying to move, but he could not. "It has nothing to do with you," I said. "This seeing is just what is possible for us all. And you are at the center of something horrible and large and strange at this moment. And it must be done like this for everyone." And then he turned and died, looking down at earth, a strange smile pulling at the corners of his mouth, not a satisfied smile, but something of otherworldly irony and sadness. I stood slowly and walked down the hill to vanish among the people and the electric purple night. The warriors knew not to touch him, not to cut him, but to leave him lying where he was. It was done now, and the white newspapers would say the worst about our mutilations, no matter what was done or not done, no matter what soldiers who knew better might see in the following days as the populace was lost in their craziness and lust for war and gold at this point. What happened that day was a powerful center of a huge churning movement in history, a beginning to what would follow for the next 100 years. And what we accomplished together held a secret that would perhaps only fully come to fruit in still another 100 years. Who knows? Maybe what we accomplished that day helped to prevent even more ravages than history has held before our dismayed eyes. In this long war, but that's what it is. Might call it a war for the soul. I don't use that word very often, but one needs allies. So this is a woman now. Winona the Duke is her name. She's an Anishinaabe, a wonderful woman. She's an activist now. Some of you may know who she is. She's a small woman in stature, this young Anishinaabe fighter, but huge in spirit. She stands one day at the edge of her people's lake, a blue lake that owns the people rather than the other way around, watching with a smile that rises from the bottom of her belly as the rice harvesters paddle out in their canoes into the tall, full rice plants. On another day, she stands erect and intense, yet relaxed in her firm conviction before a polished old courtroom, before a judge who does not understand how a lake can own a people. It may be that, as a wrinkled and tired old man, he might come to it at this point in his life, where he has seen so much senseless but logical laws. But the tradition of law he obeys does not see it, and he must return to that legacy to call up his decision and his position, the rigid position of his culture. It's strange that his culture does not even define itself as a culture, except for in its music, popular music, and blues and jazz. These are the famous signatures, but law and property, decidedly cultural positions, are defined only as what's right, ontological even, given, evolved, and evolving from a moral base that is assumed and never defined, but for in position after position, the posture that too often gives those who wield the gavel just what they want. Again, I am struck by the strangeness of it, but no longer surprised. And this small, beautiful woman standing square-shouldered in front of it all, in front of the centuries of it all, fills me with pride and gratitude. When the harvesters return, the smell of the rice fills the air, and there are tired smiles and celebrations. They are not rich, these people, but they have survived. And they continue to survive, for through their very strength of spirit, they have convinced the law the rice is theirs for almost 200 years in trade for almost all of their land. They have found enough like-minded old white men to form a trail of precedent that holds precarious sway from 1837 to the first decades of the 21st century. They climb into old Ford pickups and make their ways home. A man driving with one hand and caressing his wife's knee with the other, glancing to her as they remember all the years of poling through the shallows, carefully threshing the grains from the plants overhanging the canoe bottom. They recall not only their own years, but the years of all those before them. Reflections of long walks home, carrying handmade baskets, shine off the truck's dusty windshield, and they smile, the same smile the young woman does from deep within where their lives began. In the courtroom, young, finely dressed white lawyers who are not owned by a leg, but by pages in a book and their own deep desires, tell how their clients can grow wild rice. Thanks. Tell how their clients can grow wild rice in paddies in California and market it as wild rice, even though no indigenous people grow or harvest it. It's a term, they argued to the old judge, owned by no one in particular, wild. Their clients took precious kernels from the Anishinaabe lake and put them in their test tubes, petri dishes, and centrifuges, and planted their grim-faced engineers in the genetic stream of forever, and then engineers spun round and round like kids in a tilt-a-whirl at a cheap carnival and came out smiling with wild rice in their hands. And then they named it and sold it in plastic bags with pictures of Indian canoes, two people, a couple to a canoe, paddling softly into the lakes. The Anishinaabe woman, and many alongside her and before her, said no. And the smiles fled the engineers and accountants and artists' faces, and everybody went to the big stone courthouse to decide between right and wrong, simply because there is no shame in those who think they own the land and the lake and the sky. I stood beside her one evening as the boats came back, as she watched her teenage son empty their own canoe of the rich, nutty brown and tan harvest. I had been looking at for her because I had to feel her strength, woman to woman. I hoped it would not be a one-way thing between us, me taking from her out of my own need during this very hard time in this part of the world. This is good, I said, that you are fighting. For me, 200 years was both very long and very short, the time it takes to take a breath, to glance from here to there. She looked up at me in silence before she spoke, a calm expression on her face. She nodded toward her son, who worked silently without his cell phone or iPod, listening to the others working and laughing, and to the sound of grain on old wood swishing into evening. Tiny flying insects of many kinds rode paling light. She nodded. We've been fighting this fight for a very long time, she said. Centuries. Later, as we sat at the lake's edge, looking across it and back to each other, she told me that most of the world's diverse life form, plants and animals, live on land inhabited by indigenous people, some 90%. She told me in her fact-filled, strong and gentle voice while the sun dropped lower that food corporations and medicine corporations were going into these lands with lawyers and scientists to form patents, the rights to own knowledge exclusively, knowledge indigenous people have held and shared for thousands of years. She said indigenous people were banding together now and that they must continue to band together to fight this intrusion because as the scientists twist the inheritance, the lifeblood of the plants, they play with things impossible to know. Simple things like where an adventuresome blue-necked duck might fly with a sterile pollen. A completely twisted concept of contradiction for how and why might pollen be sterile and have no power. They toy with more complex things too, like where wind might carry something they've made that is mechanical and deeply internal and mysterious, a tiny grinding steel thing like the tilt-a-whirl, a shiny steel face of one grinning particle of pollen, one crazy particle tossed into a world that has been established forever by simple respect and admiration and sunlight and rain. What might happen in this meeting? She told me all of this and more for hours, as though spilling so much of what she knew of time and science was casting it out into the world for all people to hear and know, out through a horn of plenty. I was a vehicle to her, though she did not know me. And as she talked and night came on gently with the lake lapping at the shore only feet from where we sat, I thought of where knowledge comes from, how it takes form, finds a voice, then flies like pollen from plant to plant, mind to mind, imagination to action. And I felt good, even redeemed by so much of what she brought to the world out of her own simple desire to live the way she had to. I thought that all of her knowledge and caring could only return to both of us. It could never have been one way between us, not with this woman. And when she finally went on her way with a departing nod and a warm smile, I knew how deeply she was an ally, not only of mine, but of everyone. In this, there is great comfort and more. There is possibility. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You were saying go ahead. You were saying, well,
What?
go ahead. You were saying go ahead. More.
Didn't know what that meant. Whether it was like that. You promised me earlier a hook. This is very short. One of the other allies in here is Will Rogers. You all know who he was? From Cherokee, the satirist, social satirist, humorist. Will Rogers was a social satirist and humorist of the 1920s and 1930s. He was a confidant of many U.S. presidents. He's famous for going to see Mussolini at the time that fascism was rising in Italy, and Mussolini said to him, because he was as famous as Ali during Ali's high years, right, worldwide. And Mussolini said to him, he said, well, I'm very impressed that you came all this way to see me. And Will Rogers said, well, I just wanted to see what kind of a bird you was. So Will Rogers was a hero in my family. Will Rogers was a hero in my family, and so he's an ally to Agana throughout. And here, Agana is so beset by all the stuff going on in the world, she wants to forget. She wants to forget it, you know. She wants to do what, you know, people say, well, you know, just like let it go.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's like, where's it gonna go? Right? We're living on this little thing that's about that big, right? You know, circling the world, where's it? Let it go. Sorry, it just boggles my mind. To where? The trash bin. We're living in the trash bin, you know. Okay, so she's depressed. She's having a hard time, so she goes to Will. And he tells her, you know, you can't forget. You see, he said, the Trail of Tears wasn't even a century ago, and our people are still scattering all over this land. You know that. It's still scattering today in 1920 because the Indian Territory is a tough place to call home, and it's not our home. Out in California, they just put the last Yahi, they call him, a fellow named Ishi, to rest after he showed those folks out there what his life was like for 40 years of hiding from them very same folk. Had him in a museum in Berkeley, they did. That was only yesterday, about the time my young son was born. I can't forget that, my son being born. You don't forget something like that. And things are attached to that kind of birth. Things we see in the papers and things people talk about, they're stuck to them, and there's no getting away from it. He gathered more words in quiet, looking up at the moonlight on the oaks. A white owl cut an arc across the north end of our clearing in the place of wisdom and swept out over the hills to hunt in silence. The way I see it is that if I forget, I limit my mind, you know. I shrink it down into what I might think for a moment would get me by. But it turns out it's not enough then. I got to remember. I just got to, because it's all there. It's all there for the remembering. Now, most folks around here don't want to, and that's to their loss, if you know what I mean. There's a limit. That's a limit to their minds. And when you limit your mind, you shrink your heart. And I never want to tie my heart down or to shrink it in any way. There's too much going on, too much out in the world to get touched by and to touch. It's all just too big, you know. And if you shrink your heart, why, you shrink everything there is in this world. Don't forget that, Will said. And he meant all that he'd been talking about, and the owl's flight too. And he nodded toward it as it vanished toward the sea. Don't forget anything, and hold it gently inside of you, because it's all still moving. It's all still moving. And when you remember everything, you get a say in where it goes. Thank you.
Was that incredible? Was that incredible? Thank you so much, Jan.